hopefully do most of the talking. My background is in game design, and these are all teachers and students who actually know what they're talking about. I provide a little bit of game designer's perspective, and together we are going to cover a wide variety of topics around how to use games in the classroom, why we use games in the classroom, and what they achieve. But before we get started, I'm just going to let my panelists introduce themselves, starting on stage left with Jeremy Board.
Hello, my name is Jeremy Board. I am a 6th grade history and English teacher from Federal Way, Washington. And I first got started thinking about this topic way back when I was a student. I say this every year at this panel, when I was learning more from Sid Meier's Civilization than I was from my 7th grade history teacher. And now I am that middle school history teacher, and I bring a lot of games into my classroom for that reason. I also run the gaming club at my middle school.
Hi, my name is Francesco O. I'm a National Board Certified math teacher. High school math, where it actually gets fun. And I'm currently teaching in Gig Harbor, and I do teach a class on game design, and I've definitely been any variety of gaming club advisors over the last decade or so, yeah.
So my name is Erin J, and I was an upper elementary, middle school, and high school teacher. Used gaming, especially in French immersion, as the gaming curriculum. So what do the kids like to do? They like to play games, so we played games, and all my kids passed all French immersion tests using gaming. Never looked at a state test ever before they took it. They just learned how to game and get confident with themselves. I'm also the mom of 3 adult children, and my youngest one is at Harvey Med studying computer science and mathematics. He's created 6 of his own games, is studying the 6th coding language, and just really passionate to get other young people into gaming.
I'm the young one. I'm Anna Larson, and I'm a former student of Jeremy Board. I just graduated from Thomas Jefferson High School in Auburn, Washington, and I'll be going to Shoreline Community College in the winter. This is my first time at PAX, and I'm just like an avid game enthusiast. I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I enjoy it, so.
So just to get a feel of the room, how many teachers do we have in attendance today? Wow. All right, that is probably the largest percentage. We've been doing this for a few years now, and that is the largest percentage of teachers. For the teachers in the audience, we are going to break at about the halfway mark, and we want to turn this more into a conversation than a lecture. So think of questions if you want to start a discussion around, and about halfway through we're going to break, and you can line up at the microphone to ask questions. How many parents? Yes. It's a lot of fun trying to figure out how many games your kids should play these days. I know what my parents said, and I would like to think that they're wrong. But, because here I am today. But at the same time, like we are teachers as parents, and we are purveyors of content, and it's a very difficult line to walk. How many current students do we have? Yes, this is for all of you. So, one of the things we're going to talk about is how learning requires scaffolding, how learning requires a different mindset than doing in some ways, and talk about some ways that games can help with that. I want to start by asking a question I always start with, why? Why are we here? Why are games in the classroom important? Take it away, guys.
I say this, that games make classrooms better for teachers and students. Everything that we are trying to do in a classroom is often done better as a game. That when you play a game, failure doesn't make you want to quit. It makes you want to try again harder with what you have learned from the failure. When you play a game, your effort is rewarded. Your feedback is timely, so that the principles and successes of game design are very important to what we want to do in a classroom.
What he said. Yeah, honestly. But I will touch also on just keeping lessons engaging, right? Very few students are intrinsically motivated, and they will learn regardless. They will learn if you're not even in the room. They will just pull out the book and learn. So finding new and different hooks into the lesson while keeping the learning central. It's not just like kind of tangential, oh yeah, also you're learning about this, but making sure that the learning is the focus. Games can be extraordinarily powerful, and you increase with engagement, you get retention and free thought and all that good stuff.
So I think for me, my greatest learning was when I transitioned from teaching traditional English to teaching French immersion with no curriculum. I thought I wasn't going to be tested. I thought my students weren't going to be tested. And I gave myself the freedom to try new things. And then learned halfway through the year. Oh, by the way, your kids are going to be tested in 2 weeks in a language that they haven't studied. Anyway, but because I had this freedom, I had a revelatory thought in September. What if I use the thing that I see my students doing all the time? They play games, they sing, they dance, they act. They were incredibly dramatic all the time. Middle school teachers, you understand that. And I said, what if I use those things as a platform to teach content? And it was in that year, my first year teaching French immersion, when I realized the power of the platform that we teach through. And so I would say I believe the same way about music and theater as I do about gaming, is we need to do more of taking what kids already like to do. What are they doing when they're not with you? And use that as a vehicle to teach. And I just had the gift of seeing 2 of my kids that I had 15 years ago. I had them for 3 years. I had them 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, and I just ran into them in the Tacoma Mall last week. And they said, Miss Jones, we still talk about those games that we played 15 years ago. And they said, you were the only teacher we still talk about. They live together, they're all recent college graduates. They said, we still talk about those games. And that's when you know you've really made a difference. And so I think it's giving, now as an administrator, now as a consultant, it's me giving teachers permission to try the stuff that you know when your gut is right. But oftentimes you don't get permission to do, you really want to do it. And I see that as my work now.
Well, I think from a student perspective, adding gaming is just a good way to get the students to really think about what they're doing in a new perspective, because reading something on a textbook page and just seeing example after example of either math problems or sentences, you start to zone out. No matter how hard you're trying, you can only read so much before your brain goes, okay, I get it, and you zone out, even if you don't actually get it completely yet. So games is a good way to make you really get, Jeremy was saying, the reward system is, you know when you got it because there's something telling you, hey, you actually got this, here's your achievement. Adding the gaming aspect really helps you have that, yes, I know what I'm talking about. And it's really good for students who maybe don't have that internal motivation, so they don't know when they've reached a point of solid knowledge on the topic. So gaming is really good for even the students who do know what they're talking about.
Here's the 1-sentence soundbite. Why game in the classroom? Because humans learn through play.
And we're done. Thank you for coming. So, not all games are created equal, though. I mean, yes, games teach. We learn best when we are having fun, but not all games are going to be classroom appropriate. Not all games actually create that sense of flow that allows for excellent learning. Like if I play a twin stick shooter, I'm mainly learning how to play a twin stick shooter better than I did before. What are the elements of a classroom game that make it successful?
So it really comes down to what you are trying to accomplish as an educator, and you're going to be planning this out. That there's lots of different levels of using games in a classroom. If you can gamify an entire class, and there's several different people that have done this out there, that you are treating your students as characters and giving them points, and it goes through the whole class. You can gamify a unit. One of the most successful ones that I did was gamifying a unit on Mesopotamian history, but that was the whole unit. You can gamify a day, which is often the most common, or gamify an activity. But it really goes to what you are trying to accomplish as an educator. I design custom review games for all of the history units that I teach for reviewing for the test. And one of the things that I want is to make sure that students learn something by playing that game that reinforces what we have already learned. Every teacher who's ever, or every student who's ever gone through. When you're reviewing for a test, everyone plays some version of Jeopardy. I started on this off because I got really bored of playing Jeopardy, and it didn't enhance the unit that I was teaching. So my goal, for example, doing a review game for ancient Greece, the student should learn something about how the ancient Greek polises interacted with each other by playing that game. So it really depends on what level you are trying to gamify what you are doing.
So there are a million things to think about when designing or applying a game to a classroom. One of the ones that I'm going to harp on right now is bastardization of thought. And that's the concept where, and you've all experienced this. All right, everybody work this problem out and somebody yells out the answer. And then every other person who was halfway through thinking about it stops thinking about it. Like, oh good, I don't have to do this anymore. And building in ways so that people hang on to their answers or otherwise allowing people to finish their own creative thought process, because that's where lies rigor. And that's where I think the true value is. I'm going to cut myself off right there, or it will be 3 hours later.
I think it's really deciding when it's appropriate to do what as well. I'm also an athlete, and there's a power in physical movement too. And not every kid is an athlete at all, but there's something powerful in getting kids up and moving. So I'm always thinking about, okay, there's the physical get up and moving activities that often for me are games, but there's also the content. What I did with my students often is I would give them new content in French. So I taught language, history, science, math, and music in French. So I had my students 5 hours a day without any curriculum. Have you heard me say that before? But I would give my students, here's the content for the week. I went to Goodwill and I got every board game that I could find with all the pieces, lots of dice. I was a DM in middle school, so I loved dice. And I would just buy dice and I would tell kids, okay, based on the game that you're most drawn to, card game, I want you to get yourself in teams and make games. But it was really what is the most appropriate for this particular time in our classroom. And it can't just be there are times when it's important to just have fun, but there are more important things that we need to get done with our time. So we need to make sure that we're not just having fun, that you have really clear targets for the game, and here's what the outcomes are that we want to, and make sure those are clear to students, otherwise they can get lost in having lots of fun and forgetting why the heck they're doing the game.
Yeah, I really think the most important thing to remember is that these games are for your classroom so you can learn something, so that you're not wasting your time or the students' time. While games are fun, there's a purpose for why we're trying to get them into the classroom and help kids learn through them, as opposed to just distracting them from the purpose of the game.
And I think it comes back to basic lesson or learning design. The AVID program has something that's called WICR, which stands for Writing, Inquiry, Collaboration, Organization, and Reading. And a good lesson should hopefully touch on it, all 5 of them ideally. And if your game is doing that as well, it's going to be as effective or more effective and more engaging than what you might have otherwise designed.
Do you have trouble working your game curriculum into that which you need to assess students against? Has that been a challenge for you guys? Has that been something that you've been supported by your administration on, or you had to battle a little bit?
Oh, I'm just like an allowable by like administrators saying yes or no level?
Whatever your experience has been.
Well, for as far as game design goes, it's like a lot of times, I mean, and I have, if anybody's interested, I mean, I've got a ton of like ready-made kind of resources, but if you're looking to do your own game, using backwards design, right? So starting with the goal, what do I want students to learn? Okay, and then how are, then basically working backwards, different facets and elements, and, can I make them in small teams so there's co-op and PvP for everybody? But like, that's all well and good, and that works a lot of the times, but sometimes you just get an idea, and I'm gonna call it organic design, where it just kind of blossoms forth from like a concept. And as long as it goes naturally into your content and you don't have to shoehorn it in, I also think that, if suddenly the muse strikes you on the forehead, then yeah, go for it that way too. So it can be either way. Although if you're being intentional about it, I usually start with the goal in mind.
So my first year teaching French immersion, I got a ton of crap from my administrators. And not only the administrators, every teacher around me, you're having way too much fun with your kids, you can't possibly be learning. And I just got it like every single day until our test scores came back. And when our test scores came back and we had scored second highest in the school, and my students didn't use any English, I used not one word of English all year, that's what changed everything. And then they couldn't really say anything to me. So be really good at what you're doing. But now I learned that in that process, when I then became an administrator, I need to give my folks permission, because I think often we get a different message from administration. We were just talking about pacing guides earlier, and I have an incredible disdain for pacing guides. I think, if we're going to talk about differentiated instruction and then tell people this is where you should be on day 7, sounds like an oxymoron to me, but anyway. I realized the power of being an administrator who had done that work to really tell my staff, I want to trust you. I hired you because I believe you're really great at what you do, and I need to trust that you know what's best for your students. And really walking alongside people and even helping them develop games and develop music and develop kind of those things that are not in a textbook, walking alongside with them. And I think that was really powerful. But also modeling as administrator in my training and in staff development, modeling some of those games and really showing, not just telling, the power of using gaming.
So in a lot of ways, the democratization of platforms has made this a golden age for gaming. You can release an indie game on Steam, and you'll find the 20,000 people who want to play your specific weird little game, because there's millions and millions and millions of people out there. But you are not a Steam library. You are individual teachers, and everyone's tastes are a little bit different. How do you let students customize their interaction? Some of them may not be competitive. Some of them may want to work individually with teams. How do you deal with that?
So this is something that I have come to learn through trial and error. And it gets back, like every time I do this panel, I think this is year 4 since we have started doing this, I have had a growing list of rules for what I have learned designing games in the classroom. And that question gets to about 3 of what started off as 2, now it's 5. And so part of it gets back to, I'm going to recommend this book a lot. This is Reality is Broken by Jane McGonigal. And it gets back to what her definition of a game is. It's a voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. And voluntary is a key component of what a game is. If you don't choose to play it, especially in a classroom, it's not a game, it's just a really convoluted assignment. So every time I play a game in the classroom, it is an optional activity. You can play this game and do whatever I'm trying to accomplish with it, or you can do the same task some other way. And those choices don't have to be equal. Oftentimes, you can play the review game with us, or you can do the practice test again. And I don't often get kids choosing to do the other option, but I do. Maybe they've had a really terrible day. Maybe they're just packed out on social interaction for the day. Maybe they just, for whatever reason, but it's optional. The game is always optional, or it's not a game. I try as much as I can to make the game either have a cooperative way to play it or a competitive way to play it, or there is cooperation and competition built in so the student can focus on what it is they feel most comfortable with, whether it is cooperating with their team members or planning their strategy to compete with other team members.
Well, okay.
And that's the last word on that.
All right. So, one of the things that I know we've talked about a lot is sort of the immediacy of feedback, and like how immediacy of feedback creates shorter learning loops. Are there ways you can tell if that's working? Like how do you know when your game is actually working in real time? Because that's your feedback loop too.
Part of the art and science blend of the craft of teaching is being able to read the classroom. That a lot comes with experience, but making sure that kids are engaged and not just complacent. And there are all sorts of formative ways to assess. A lot of people do show fingers 0 through 5, or I like to do thumbs down, thumbs up, and then if they're all thumbs down, ask how I can lower their elbow. But formative assessment is a key part of just pedagogy. So, do keep in mind, don't just go off, you have to be dynamic at all times in teaching.
And I think, the challenge can be with games. If you're sitting at your desk the whole time and the 4 kids in the class who've won come up and let you know that they've won, what is that? That doesn't tell you anything. So I think for me, what was really important as a classroom teacher was being sure that I was walking around and watching and listening and constantly getting feedback. Because I think it's in those moments when there's the aha, when a kid either loses or makes a mistake or catches himself, or those are the powerful learning opportunities. And one of the things I always did, and I do that with my iPad now, is I take notes as I'm walking around the classroom so I can go back and say, hey Johnny, I watched when this happened. That was so cool to watch your eyes light up, and what was the thing you learned, and really having specific feedback for students in the process of the game. But you have to be kind of gathering that, so whether it's on a clipboard or your iPad or wherever, gathering notes as you walk through the classroom.
And how can you tell if a game is working in the classroom?
Well, as a student, I've played many games in the classroom that haven't worked, and so I have experience on both ends of this. I think that even when a game doesn't end up working like the teacher expected, you can still learn from it. I remember there was a new game my teacher had never had, but some other teacher recommended it, and she gave it to my group and was like, all right, you guys are going to figure out how to play this so I can try it with my next class. And they're like, all right. So it was a game about science, and we were using pasta to represent like different molecules, and there were no instructions, just some vague pictures, and we kept trying, and I ended up learning a little from it because on the test I was like, oh, that's the molecule that's this type of pasta. I remember that from but we never figured out how to get that game to work, and our teacher was coming back and checking on us and helping us out. So even when you don't know what you're doing and you're trying really hard, you can still learn something from it. I think one of the ways to tell if the game is successful is if you end up leaving with something, even if it's just one thing, like taking the time to try that game and be like, oh, at least I know this molecule comes from this organ, or something like super small. Like it's better than them having like spaced out staring at a textbook, even if you're having like an off day or something like that. Like the point of the game is to learn something, even if it's not all of what you wanted. If they get one thing out of it, I feel like it can be counted as a success.
For the teachers in the room who are thinking about trying, give yourself the freedom to fail as well. A lot of times the first time that I try to gamify something, it does not accomplish what I'm intending it to accomplish, but I'm getting closer each time, and just like you're going to give your students, give yourself the freedom to fail as well.
You can just call it early access and people will
I want to talk about failure too. For those of you who are Washingtonians, I lost an election last year by 1% after investing $50,000 in my car and $50,000 of my own money. It's hard to lose, but I will tell you that one of the reasons I bounced back so quickly is because I've been playing games and I've been an athlete. I've been practicing losing and getting back up for a long time. And I think one of the greatest gifts of games is teaching kids how to get back up. And I think, having my kids are 20, 21, and 22. I've been been around kids for the last 26 years. I think one of the greatest disservices we've done to this last generation of kids is giving out awards to every kid who just shows up. Because I think what happens then is when they get into their adult years and they experience failure for the first time, it crushes them. And I've witnessed this with far too many college students. And so I just wanted to speak to the whole failure piece. We have to model that failure as educators too. And I think, my parents are both teachers and they came from a generation of, as teacher, you must be perfect always and don't ever show your weakness, and if you make a mistake, pretend it's not there and hope that no one sees it. I actually think the other way. I think we need to model making mistakes and getting back up and letting our students see that life is not over when we make a mistake, that we are not perfect, that we're always students. And I think those are powerful lessons that can be learned really well through games. And it's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about gaming, about sports, about teaching our children how to lose and get back up.
That also it plays right into the fact that one of the things that games do, we talk about learning through play, it encourages a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset with those of you that are familiar with those terms, right? It is not about failure means just death and I should just give up. You're learning along the way, and that's what matters. And in fact, I think that the more engaging and the more fun, the game is, the more fun the kids are having. Score tends to matter less and less. I mean, you look at just general social games. I mean, and I know we're at a gaming convention, so I'm sure somebody in this room has played Joking Hazard to win. But most of the time, that's not how that works.
So I'll just quote Jane McGonigal on this: the right kind of failure feedback is a reward. It makes us more engaged and more optimistic about our odds of success.
So I remember when I was on the debate team, it was maybe as an adolescent the first time I actually had to argue a position I didn't believe in. It was maybe the first time I actually had to confront the idea that other people believe things and maybe that's valid. It's 2017. I don't know what's changed in the last year, but some things. Can we use games to broach difficult topics in safe ways?
I think we have to. I think, I was not raised in the United States. I was raised in Europe, and where people tended, and to speak from my experience as a kid, tended to be more honest about things. When I came to the United States, it was PC culture, especially out here on the West Coast. Like, we don't really talk about stuff. We're gonna talk all around it, and I think we have to talk. I mean, if we look at our country in the last 6 weeks, especially, I could say more than that, but let's just focus on the last 6 weeks. We've been through a lot of stuff, and I think games provide a platform to have some difficult conversations in a safe way, and even to be the bad guy in the game. Like, there are opportunities then to kind of push kids into the position where you have to play the role of somebody and think about the other side. And I think one of the greatest dangers of the America that I experience right now, especially as a Black woman, I'll be honest, and my children are all bigger than me. I'm 6 feet tall. My children are all bigger than me by 150 pounds and a couple inches. And I'll be really honest, my children are really scared to be in college right now. Just keeping it real. I sent my son back to Harvey Med last week, and his last words were, I'm afraid to walk right now. I think we have to use games as a platform to talk about difficult things, and we have to help our young people figure out how do we disagree without shutting people down. How do I hear something that is difficult to hear without myself shutting down? And I think games become this great way, this great vehicle to engage in difficult conversations, difficult thinking opportunities without killing each other.
I also think talking about games can help us assess that. As I said, I teach middle school. I don't know if any of you have been on Twitch chat. But in my advisory class, I know a lot of my students are on there, and we use that as a way to discuss how the people on the other end of the screen are also people. And that the human brain is not real good at empathizing with somebody at the other end of a wire or a wireless, and bringing that conversation up about how you interact with people when you're 13.
Horrible. Especially when they're not right in front of you. Right? Treat them like they were. Right?
So it is about halfway through our time, as promised. I'm going to turn it over to the panel for any last topics that we wanted to cover, and then we're going to take some questions.
I mentioned that I had learned like 5 really big things through this process and going through this panel, and I covered some of them, but I wanted to just get them out there. One, whenever I do a whole class game in my classroom where there are multiple teams and there is a prize for winning, which there often is, I also have a prize for sportsmanship, and that is entirely my decision. It could be the first place team, the last place team, any team, but it helps get those teams that may be falling behind to still be engaged because they have another method of basically winning by demonstrating the behaviors that I want to see. I mentioned voluntary, I mentioned co-op versus competitive. Make sure you know your class before you are attempting to play certain types of games, especially competitive games. The only one of my history review games in which teams can directly interact with each other is my Ancient Greece game, in which there is a certain amount of treasure in the classroom and every team wants all of it. Not every class gets to play that game because I have met, like, a lot of them aren't going to be able to handle that level of competition. And be okay with the first play failing. So I think that's going to be my last word for now.
Thinking mathematically. John Mason. It's an interesting read. It's about math insofar as all things are about math, but it really is about logical thinking. And I think that any game that you can do that incorporates getting students to have their own creative thought that they get to develop, you're doing all right.
So I've already mentioned this a little bit, alluded to this. When I look at this audience, but I think about the students that I've served, predominantly students of color, and I don't see, every year I come to PAX, I don't see the same numbers of students of color. And just being intentional about how are we creating opportunities for all young people to see themselves in this space. And one of the things that I believe is kids can't imagine what they haven't seen before. And it's one of the reasons I talk with kids about having been a dungeon master. They look at me and they're like, what, you? Me. But really kind of changing this narrative. And, you know, I am a basketball player, played in 12 countries, but I also was a dungeon master. And really disrupting the narratives about what is the potential for our young people. And it's just a really important message. And so how can you find some examples for your students of what gamers look like? Because they look like all of us, right? But your students don't know that. And so being really intentional about finding people in your community who could come in and play games with you to really model what's possible.
I guess my final thing that I would like to say is just trust the games. I've all seen like videos of like little kids who like can get on iPads and they're like 1 year old and they know how to turn on the game, play that game, and their parents are sitting there like, how did you even learn how to turn on an iPad? There's been a shift as technology becomes more prevalent in our lives that children are learning from a young age how to use technology to game, how to game without even knowing it. Mobile games are a huge source of gaming, whether or not people choose to accept that as part of the gaming culture. And so I think trusting the power of gaming and using that as a way to learn, because whether we like it or not, children are learning how to game through mobile devices, through technology at a very young age now. So trusting that game to leave an impact on them, whether or not you know it will. We've been conditioned now, like through the younger generations, we are learning how to game whether or not we're being taught on purpose. So learning that skill as a teacher and taking advantage of the fact that we want to game, whether or not we know we want to game, is a good skill to have, and to be, like they said, be able to read your classroom, know your kids, but gaming is something that more and more students are learning how to do from a young age, and we are willing to try new things just like you are.
It looks like we have 2 microphones, so pick the one that's nearest you and we'll figure this thing out.
I'll look at myself first.
All right, go for it. Start us off.
Hi, so I'm getting a online master's from Boise State in education technology with a focus on games and education, and I grew up playing games. But my question is, one of the big stats, and I can't remember the exact statistic because I mean, come on, it's grad school, I'm not gonna remember the exact is that while the gaming population has grown to be about 50% of the American population now acknowledges that they play games and will admit that games are like something that isn't just for kids. The stats show that the teaching population hasn't changed at all. Like, it's become a self-selecting community that only takes people who basically give you that 15% of people who play games still. So we talked about it a little bit, like running into your supervisor and stuff, but how do you guys see countering that? Because I'm coming in from the after-school side of things, and I'm very much like, all right, I'm gonna go do after-school work. Like, I'm not gonna try to affect the public system in a lot of ways. And partially that is scary.
I think when we talked about that 50% stat, I have seen numbers that are much higher because, as Anna said, they're counting the mobile gaming, and like almost everyone is gaming, whether it's a hardcore League of Legends trying to be pro, or whether it's playing solitaire on your phone. So a lot of it in the public education system, like we're doing a lot of focus on PLCs, our professional learning communities, and if one person is doing something that is working, it turns out teachers want to do things that work. So I think a lot of it is just talking to colleagues and demonstrating things, realizing that not everyone is going to jump right into the deep end of the 2-month-long strategy game that I'm going to run in my classroom, but getting people slowly along. People want to play games.
I also think that, this is my 13th year teaching, so it's not like I'm like, a grizzled veteran, but I do feel that it has been changing slowly, and it is catching up slowly, because those adults that are gamers are filtering in, and as the old guard leaves, it's just taking a generation to catch up.
I think another challenge, though, having been at the policy level, so I've worked for 2 state superintendents and I've worked in administration. With all the testing that we're asking teachers to do, I think we're killing the creativity of the classroom, both of instructors and of students. And so I think, it's one of the reasons I ran for office, because I think we've got to get back to why did we even get into the profession in the first place. And I think the most important thing we do as educators is capture kids' hearts. How do we do that? With games and stuff that they can connect to. And so I think it's really changing a narrative too about what is school for? Is school about getting kids to a certain score on a test? I would say no. But I think there are other people who would say otherwise. And I think there have been so many messages that those people who may want to come in and do games feel shackled by, again, those pacing guides and how do I get my game in if I got to be on page so-and-so. So I think we've got to push from both ends to allow teachers the creativity to be able to do what they got into the profession to do.
I also think that there are the vast majority of teachers out there are very good teachers. I'm the vice president of my local as well, and I talk to a lot of them. And teachers adjust to what their classes need. And as our students come in, having gained from the time they could pick up an electronic device, I was avoiding branding, teachers are adjusting what their students are expecting. Immediacy of feedback is something that window is growing smaller and smaller and smaller. So I think there's a lot of teachers who might not have grown up gamers, but are seeing what their students need, and this is what those are.
Yeah. Nothing brings imitation faster than success. So if you're doing it and it's working, others are going to come around. So we're going to do like the merging into traffic rules. We're just going to go back and forth.
Hey, so my husband and I are currently working on, we would love to be able to get into classrooms. We think it would be great. It's a puzzle game, and it teaches like circuitry and logic and stuff like that. But we're not quite sure how to go about doing that. How would you guys recommend us getting our game into students' hands in like classrooms and robotics clubs and stuff like that?
Talk to the teachers. So a lot of times for games that are used in the classroom, I need them to do very specific things. I need them to hit certain standards that I am working on. So Washington State follows the Common Core standards, and there's lots that can be said about the Common Core, but we follow those standards. So if you can figure out what standards your game is working on and at what level, I think you will have a better in.
Okay. Yeah, we're both children of the 80s, so we grew up doing number munchers and the ubiquitous Oregon Trail, and so we don't know how that has gaming in the classroom has changed over the last 25, 30 years. So yeah, that's why we're kind of trying to figure out how to get in there.
Yeah, as far as trying to how to kind of break in on a broad level, that's a really good question. I've been trying to contact Wizards of the Coast with a Magic the Gathering math curriculum for a few years now.
That would be awesome.
This will be my first year teaching with one-to-one technology. Do any of you have any tips for how to incorporate gaming with that technology?
I wish I had one-to-one technology. So I designed most of my in-classroom games because I don't have one-to-one technology. I live in a school that's designed on I teach in a school that's designed on a California plan. I live in the school too. So we can't even have computers on wheels because the pebble creep will shake the hard drives apart as I'm wheeling in my classroom. So we've got computer labs. So I basically designed a whole bunch of board games to play in my class. So I haven't really worked on that.
I mean, there's a lot of pre-packaged stuff that you can do. Who's used Kahoot, right? Yeah, but you want to make sure that it's not just fancy Jeopardy that looks good for T-Pad. Too. So there are always those style and Socrative and all those types of resources that you now have access to because all of your students have access to the technology.
I think there are gifts and dangers in the one-to-one technology. I think there are some school districts, and I don't know where you are, where they see that as the answer to all things, and I think that's dangerous as well. So I think anything that you could do on a board game, you can do on a one-to-one. It's just making sure students learn how to be responsible with it. I think creating opportunities for them to engage with kids around the world would be really, I'd be super excited about using one-to-one technology to engage with another classroom to build a game around the world. That to me, so my son and his 4 best friends from Harvey Med built a game this summer. And they're in 4 different states, and it was the coolest thing to watch them get online and troubleshoot. And one kid was learning one coding language, another kid was learning another coding language. And so I think there are some incredible opportunities with technology to get kids from other spaces talking about games. So, yeah.
And just real quick, what level and subject are you going to be teaching?
8th grade English.
Okay, just off the top of my head, if I had that, I might look at some of the asynchronous role-playing games and how you can do that and get into those text-based and get your kids writing and engaged and all in one space somewhere in there. That would be off the top of my head the first spot that I would go.
Okay. Even collaborative storytelling. Oh, getting kids to write different pieces. No, I'm just
You can do choose your own adventures and everybody writes a different page.
All right. Back, Mike?
Yes. Yeah, so I'm a substitute teacher. I've been subbing, for a year and a half now, and I had a background in theater, and so being a theater person, I love looking for ways to get students more directly involved with the material, so that it would stick out more with them. Like one of my favorite books is this one called Creative Dramatics, which we're you want to teach your kids vocabulary? Well, have them create a scene that conveys the meaning of that word, and I love examples like that, but I would like to bring game elements into the classroom when possible, but at the same time I would love there to be a book that maybe provides examples in a similar manner, but maybe there is a book like that and I just don't know where it is. To your knowledge, has anyone ever made a book like that? Gives examples of framework provide in the classroom. Does this make sense?
If it exists, I haven't found it yet.
Someone needs to write it. I would love it. Wouldn't we all love something like that? Yeah.
So I have good news and bad news. and they're the same news. I've done a lot of talks, various industry capacity, and everyone says there should be a book, and the person passionate enough to ask the question, where is the book, is probably the person who should write the book.
It's tempting. It's tempting. Yeah, maybe I should find some game designers and ask them for ideas.
Well,
Because unfortunately, I haven't studied game design myself. Then maybe I should.
all right, thank you. Front row?
Yeah, so there's sort of a debate in the teaching world about how you deal with student learning styles. So if a student is a visual learner, do you adapt the curriculum and the assignment to their learning style, or do you sort of encourage, do you just sort of say, here's the assignment, and then get them to adapt to it? Because of course, in the real world, you know, if your boss gives you a task or something, you don't necessarily have the option of getting different kinds of assignment based on what you like. So I wonder if there's a similar question to be asked about video games. Is it possible, is there such a thing as too much gamification? Is it possible that it makes things a little almost too easy for the students, like you're putting it on too much of a platter? Or in your experience as teachers, do you find that students are very readily able to sort of take the skills that they learn from video games, whether it's learning to overcome failure and discouragement or just adapting to different concepts? Do you find that that readily transfers to non-game tasks?
Knock that to you first.
I think as a student that gaming skills transfer over even not to non-gaming situations, like the co-op that you learn as a group, being with people you don't like is something that you're going to deal with for the rest of your life. I remember my 6th grade year, I did not talk, I would do my assignments, I would read my book, and then I would leave when the bell rang, and I would not talk to anybody. And he would always have review games, and he'd be like, you're going to sit with strangers you don't know. And I was like, great! And so I was always stuck with people, and I was that kid who would do all the work and knew all the answers, and I would always be stuck with kids who questioned everything, were like, maybe that's not the right answer. And so I think that even the skills that you don't realize you're learning, like, you can still take out of those games, even if like you don't remember the history later, you remember how to deal with someone who's constantly going to be like, no, you're wrong, and stuff like that. So
I think one of your questions was if there's too much gaming. I mean, I think if you do too much of anything, it's not good. But one of the things, as an instructional coach and now a teacher trainer, I teach teachers is how do you teach students, regardless of their learning style, how to do other learning styles. So one of the things I try to help teachers do is how do you identify the learning styles of each student, but then how do you teach them other learning styles? Because you're on the job, you're right, you're not going to have options. So I think in a classroom we need to practice multiple learning styles. So if we do any one thing, and this is such a challenge. You know, my father was a math teacher for 44 years. He learned math a certain way, and so he tended to teach it in the way that he learned best. I think for us as teachers, how do we even disrupt our own and make sure that we're intentional about doing the thing that may even be uncomfortable for us, and not always teaching through the same lens? I think that's when we're most effective.
I wanted to chime in about the it's a trap about learning styles, which is kids buy into this and they're like, no, I'm an auditory learner, and it's not binary. You have different levels of each, and honestly, they fluctuate quite a bit. But like definitely in your lesson design, in your game design, you want to keep that in mind, but don't think, oh, I need to hit, here's my checklist. It's if you are mindful in your game design, and again, you're not going to beat the dead horse, and this is the game we do every Friday, and we're like, no, right? That's just keep those things in mind and use common sense, but be aware that they exist.
Is there too much? Is there such a thing as too much gaming in the classroom? Yes, just like there's such a thing as too much anything in my classroom. Part of my job, as Erin was talking about, is to create well-rounded students. That my students, yes, should be able to play a cooperative or a competitive game to accomplish this task. They also need to be able to sit and read silently for 45 minutes because they're going to have to do that at some point. They have to be able to sit with somebody else and cite a text and create this organization. That I love gaming in the classroom as much as anything I do in there, but it's like when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Like I should have all sorts of things in my educational toolkit, and just because this is my favorite hammer doesn't mean that I'm going to use it all of the time.
Thanks.
In the back.
Hi. Okay, I'm gonna try to make this not long and rambling, which is kind of feeling like right now. I taught for 10 years and actually have a really similar background to you. I taught French as a second language, science, math, all that stuff, but I taught in Canada. And so the province actually that I taught for redesigned the whole curriculum about 10 years ago for gameplay and inquiry for K to 12. And so I come from a system where that's normal, and this sounds awful, but the American system is very often used as a cautionary tale. And so now we're living here, and I have a 3-year-old. And so we're looking at going into schools, and in a lot of ways, because I've heard all of these cautionary tales, I'm a little petrified of not only what she's going to be facing, but also of either becoming that parent that drives teachers crazy, or just getting really frustrated. So I guess my question is kind of towards, have you seen a shift from the curriculum design perspective where the boards are sort of trying to get on board with the inquiry method and trying to get on board with, play as a way to learn? Or on the other side, advocacy. How do you advocate without becoming that parent? Because I do not want to be that parent. I have had that parent. But at the same time, I want to advocate for my kids. So yes, there is my question.
I think you need to be intentional about investigating the school district that you're in. I've traveled the state. Each school district is very different. And so I think some school districts are much more open to and promote gameplay and play, period. There are other districts that don't, and you can just ask around, ask other parents. And then I think what's most effective having been a mom, I've got one with Asperger's, one with PTSD, and one who's dysgraphic. So I've been that mom my whole life. But finding other moms and dads who are walking through the same thing, and you go together, so you're not ever just one voice, there are many voices. And I think social media is a really great way to galvanize multiple voices so that it's not just you. But I think being really intentional, we literally moved to a district to get what my kids needed. So and I know there's privilege in that, I get it, but sometimes you do what you have to do to get your kids what they need.
As far as in the realm of high school mathematics, there's been a big push for inquiry for, as long as I've been teaching. It's progressing.
But I think that it is inconsistent and fluctuates based on the leadership of the school, of the school district, that sometimes there is you were in education for 10 years, we talk about the pendulum all the time. Yep, we're going to be at this, nope, all of this doesn't work. All right, now we're over here. Oh look, all of this doesn't work, so we're going all the way back over here when your target is right there. So it fluctuates. It's hard to say there is an overall trend.
So as the parent of a 6-year-old, I also don't want to be that dad, but I will be that dad. I will absolutely be that dad. The one thing that, I've got 1 year of a kindergarten under my belt, but the useless piece of advice I'll give is it is helpful to build a relationship with your teacher. There are ways, hey, I figured it out. There are ways you can support that teacher without being pushy and overbearing. They need help, and we can help them as parents. I am filled with terror all the time for my son, just overwhelming terror. In the 2010 census, in 11 states, the most common job that people listed on the census was truck driver. 11 states, most common job. In 2030, there aren't going to be any. So I'm terrified that what we're learning and what we're teaching may not be precisely what the future needs. So you build a relationship with the teachers and you help them subversively help your child become a human being. And if you can manage that, I think you'll be okay.
I want that on a t-shirt.
Yes.
You guys had mentioned sportsmanship trophies and stuff like that. How else do you handle toxic behaviors and other things like that, especially in middle school or high school kids, where they're all about the winning and then their feelings get hurt, or they're upset about how the other person was playing the game and it wasn't the same? And how do you handle the toxic
So a lot of the kids that are really invested in the game, the most important thing for them is being able to play it. And if you cannot demonstrate the behaviors that allow all of us to enjoy this activity, you are going to have this alternate activity. And after a couple times, they will check themselves because the most important thing for them is being involved in it. Worse than losing is being excluded.
I mean, and part of that is just at the start of the year, just setting up the atmosphere of your classroom and modeling, sportsmanship at all times. I know that sometimes that's not enough, so then you might have to, I will turn this classroom around, but I think setting it up right initially and modeling, graciousness in defeat and in victory and all of that good sportsmanship stuff does go a long way.
I think that first couple weeks of school, doing tons of team building. I never touched content until the third week of school. We just did team building. We got to know what are people's strengths, what are their weaknesses, how do we communicate with each other, and really setting, culture will happen or you can create it. And really being intentional about what's the culture that I want to create. And I taught most of my girls middle school, so they were kooky, and they're doing this and I'm right here, which is great. But really, as they're doing this, like every moment is a teachable moment. So, I tell students right up at the front of the year, some of you are going to do crazy things in the middle of the year, and we're going to stop everything you do and we're going to talk about it. And I'm just super transparent that way, and if I knew Jeremy was having a bad day, I could tell at the door, and I would stop and have a conversation with him first and say, we're about to play a game today. I can tell you're already having a tough day. Do you think you can handle it? And what was so cool was this particular kid learns how to regulate himself, and he learned to tell me, Miss Jones, I don't think I can play today. And that is probably the greatest lesson he could have learned is, I'm not feeling it today. I need to check myself out and just sit and read a book today. And so I think we're teaching them more skills than just content, right? And so it's such a great opportunity.
The folks at Riot have actually done some great social science research in toxicity in communities. And what they found was something that I think all the teachers already know, is that there's a great gulf between perception and reality, but the perception is the reality for the participants. That if one person in this room is basically saying that the Giants are the worst team that ever played Major League Baseball, supports them, is just a terrible, terrible human. And nobody says, no, Nick, you're being a jerk. It will feel to the one person that everyone is against him. When in fact there is one jerk and one human being and everyone else who's probably thinking, wow, I wish that guy would shut up. I wish that guy somebody should say something to that guy. The perception is 99 against 1. When it's actually 99 against 1 the other way. But if nobody speaks up, nobody feels it. So for toxicity, and this is just curating a game environment, you've got to be that second person. Everyone has a responsibility to be that second person. White guys in the room, you super have a responsibility to be that second person. It's easier for us. Sorry. But it's important, so you gave me a microphone. This is what I do.
So, kids who play games eventually probably are going to want to make games. Do you have any stories or thoughts about what works well with that, or how to encourage it?
Yes, they should make games. Very yes much.
So everyone who designs games gets into it somewhere different. I mean, I never became a professional game designer. I became a professional teacher and ended up designing games.
I became a professional game designer and I mostly teach people, so yeah. Whichever. One of the things that I would tell any student is that it's never been easier. Like the tools have never been more free, they're all free, or easier to use. The Unity engine is fantastic. You can get a student's license for free and just go onto YouTube and watch tutorials, and you can be making games in Unity this afternoon. If you're so inclined, RPG Maker is a sort of out-of-the-box tool set that if you want to do something a little bit more narrative, there are so many tools that make it so easy. You don't have to be a software engineer to make games anymore. So that and most of the prototyping can be done with index cards and a handful of dice. So yes, make games.
I would suggest if they're trying to make a board game, make sure that if you've got a rubric, there should be an element of luck as well as an element of skill. Otherwise, you'll get 87 versions of Candyland and everyone will stab themselves in the eyes.
So I wanted to add too. So I grew up in a time, my dad was actually a computer programmer in addition to a mathematician, and so I made my first computer game when I was, I think, 10. But I grew up in a time when, too much video games. You're only allowed to play half an hour a day, Erin. And my son wanted to play more than that. And at first I really struggled, is he going to make money doing video games? And I got to hear Jane McGonigal actually at a conference about 10 years ago, just as my son was entering middle school. And I realized as a mom, I have to encourage him to realize that not only can he play games, but he can make them. And he's designed over 400 video game characters now, and I think he's working on his 6th game. And I think it's all about, as parents and teachers, seeing that potential in our young people and pushing them to not just play. Just like I've told a lot of students who are always on apps on the phone, don't just play them, figure out how to write the code to make them and take control of this. So we as teachers, I think, really encouraging them to go to that next step and not just engage, but to create tools that they want.
Yeah, I really think believing in your students and telling them that you believe in them, because like she was saying earlier, we don't really go after things we haven't seen before because we are always scared of failure. It's just human nature. So if you've never seen someone design the game that you want to make, you're kind of scared, like maybe this isn't going to be a path that's going to work out. But some of the best people are people who started off with a couple people who just saying, I believe you can do this. And so even if you see a student who has like absolutely no background in games and they play one game and they're like, I want to do this for the rest of my life, like you might be like, I'm not sure, but don't say that to their face. Just help them get the skills that they need, because a lot of the time it's just that one piece of encouragement that they can carry with them throughout the rest of their life, and you won't even know that you were the one voice that helped them get onto a path that they're happy on.
And especially for young students, like my 6th graders, like oftentimes don't even realize that I exist outside of school hours. And I teach ancient history. They don't know that some people came up with the idea for a building, that's not something that came prepackaged. So just telling them the games that you are playing, somebody made, can be revelatory. And like that's something that they can do. So that's accurate.
All right. We are at time. We are going to make ourselves available to continue this conversation, but for now, I would like to thank our panelists. And thank all of you.
Yes, thank you so much for coming. In years previous, they've given us a room around if you want to stand around and talk to us. If not, we're going to...
Glass walls on the other side.
Okay.
Glass walls on the other side, apparently. All right, we will be there. Thank you for coming.